Talking about this topic, strictly speaking, as we combined two sessions here. All right, so let's, our first speaker is Sezgi Öztürk, who graduated from Anadolu University. Sorry, I'm not used to sitting down, so yes, who graduated from Anadolu University with a BA degree in English language teaching in 2003. She received her MA in English Language and Literature from Pınar University. She is currently a PhD candidate in English Culture and Literature at Atılım University and is working at Pınar University as an English instructor. And the title of her talk is Queerness in Juna Barnes's Knighthood.
Thank you. Welcome to this session. Juna Barnes' Knighthood is a text rooted in paradox and laced with problems. For numerous critics, knighthood has frustrated comprehension by deploying opaque language and unconventional narrative structure. However, this problematic form and style, together with the counter-hegemonic constructions of gender and sexuality, locate knighthood within a broad conception of modernism. More specifically, a classification of knighthood as strictly high modernist promotes precarious because Barnes faces the heteronormative gender and sexual identity constructs found throughout the high modernist canon. Barnes, however, addresses modernist concerns in knighthood, such as the effects of metropolis on the individual. Barnes abolishes the consolidation of seemingly disparate concepts, anxiety about modern metropolis and resistance of heteronormativity and heteronarrative, by creating a pure urban space. Reading knighthood through a queer lens provides the opportunity to unpack these complex concepts and illustrates how Barnes creates a queer world in her narrative. Regarding the textual representation of queerness in knighthood, there is a dramatic shift from a liberatory celebration of unrestricted sexuality to a nihilistic portrayal of decadent sexuality in a modern world of queerness and decay. Rather than celebrating the subversiveness of the cultural marginalization of lesbian sexuality, knighthood neither entirely supports nor dismantles discourses that pathologize sexual identity. Knighthood does not constitute a plea for social acceptance or tolerance for queerness. It constructs homosexuality as symptomatic of the modern social conditions of decay and degeneracy. That is to say, in knighthood, queerness becomes symptomatic of the modern human condition, and thereby it takes on negative significations of decay, illness, and degeneration. All the novel's main characters exhibit signs of queerness. What distinguishes characters from each other is not necessarily their queerness, since everyone is queer, but instead their awareness of themselves as queer subjects and how they use this awareness in their navigations of the night. At one point in the novel, Dr. O'Connor tells Jenny, quote, "You see before you one who, in common parlance, is called a fairy, a king. I was created in anxiety," unquote. O'Connor's statement here, his declaration of who he is, or rather who has become, reveals the consciousness of the self as a construct that we see exhibited throughout the novel. about sexual otherness. In Knighthood, queer signifiers serve as indicators of modern anxieties about the shifting surfaces of narrative and subjectivity. Knighthood represents queerness in terms of its visibility upon human bodies and its concealment within an individual's psyche. In other words, the body serves as a very readable sexological text, whereas the psyche is not readily visible. Even though one can uncover the truth about sexuality through a series of psychoanalytic sessions, and catheter carries significations of refuse and face, facets of the object. As Julia Kristeva theorizes, objection threatens identity because it threatens borders. The object is what one must, quote, permanently thrust aside in order to live. These bodily fluids, this defilement, this shit are what life withstands. I grant the difficulty on the part of death. There I am at the border of my condition as a living being. My body extricates itself as being alive from that border, unquote. Finding the doctor Emil Refuse adds to the queerness of the scene. Where does the object clutter of the group end, and Dr. O'Connor begin? Indeed, he seems to be part of the objection. Nora's discovery of the Dr. Emil Refuse threatens her own sense of identity boundaries, queering her own subjection. Leaving that O'Connor can help her make sense of the devastating affair with Robin, Nora is also drawn to O'Connor. As soon as she recovers herself after finding O'Connor in Greg, she says, quote, Doctor, I have come to ask you to tell me everything you know about tonight, unquote. She believes that the process of putting the experience into language will help her construct a coherent narrative of herself, and ultimately, that this process of self-construction and self-reconstruction will help her articulate her identity and her place in the world. Knighthood does not inscribe Nora's body as queer. In fact, of all the characters, she appears as the most normal and as the one most clearly established in terms of a national identity. Nora is described at various points as maternal, protective of her lovers and friends, and lacking a sense of humor. However, her nondescript physical appearance is offset by her eyes. Nora's mirrorless eyes do not reflect what it is she is looking at. Rather, her eyes look inward, signifying her willingness and ability to inscribe her unconscious life. On the surface, the only thing queer about Nora is her lesbianism, which she attempts to normalize by establishing a consciousness are destined to end up like Robin, animal-like and without language. By the end of the novel, Robin is unable to write her narrative because she does not even have access to human language. O'Connor constantly inscribes and redescribes the narrative of himself as moves from one story to the next, his story contributing to his inscription of himself as gay, eccentric, and alcoholic, among other things. Even though Felix attempts to ignore his queerness at various points throughout Knighthood, he eventually arrives at an uneasy acknowledgement and acceptance of his queerness when he accepts his son, Guido. Finally, Nora negotiates her queerness by ignoring O'Connor's advice to resist separation from the object. Analyzing and reanalyzing real language, her failed relationship with Robin, she attempts to make sense of the world around her and to place herself within it. Thank you for your patience and kindness.
Thank you, Susan, for your paper. We'll leave the questions and comments until the end, if that's all right with you. Our next speaker is Jake Tan. He received his BA degree in American Culture and Literature from Hacettepe University in 2002. He received his MA in English Literature from Columbia University in 2014 with a thesis on David Mitchell's contemporary dystopian novel Cloud Atlas, and is currently a PhD student in the same department. Jake is fluent in English, French, and Dutch, and specializes in cultural studies, utopian, dystopian fiction, and contemporary English literature. He is also employed as a lecturer at Ilfka University's School of Foreign Languages. And today he's going to be talking about queer love versus hate in Game of Thrones.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. My presentation is entitled Queer Love versus Hate, Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a stunning medieval fantasy which tells the story of the immense struggle for power in an ancient location named the Seven Kingdoms. It was originally written as a series of novels by the American author George R.R. Martin in 1996 and adapted to the TV screen by HBO in 2011. The series has completed its 7th season now and is scheduled to go on for a total of 8 seasons. Since its first broadcast in 2011, the Game of Thrones has attracted millions of views on a global scale and has received a total of 38 Emmy Awards. The main plot of the show is found on the Song of Ice and Fire and takes place in the imaginary continents of Westeros and Essos. It tells the struggle between struggle for the Iron Throne between the House of Westeros, House Stark, House Lannister, House Baratheon, House Tully, House Arryn, House Tyrell, and House Martell of Sunspear. These are the names of the great houses which are predominantly influential in the show. Besides these, there is also the House Greyjoy of Pike and House Targaryen of King's Landing. The Targaryens used to be a powerful dynasty which ruled the Seven Kingdoms for as long as 280 years. King Aegon I conquered all the 6 independent kingdoms with the help of his 3 dragons and united all of Westeros and Essos. After 3 centuries of Targaryen reign, King Aerys II was overthrown by Robert of House Baratheon and his followers. After Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, he ruled the realm for 17 years. Robert tragically died after getting severely wounded in a hunting party. Along with Robert Baratheon's death, the struggle between the many houses of Westeros for the Iron Throne finally began. Besides the struggle for power, Game of Thrones deals with many other themes, one of which is love and hate relationships. The show includes various love and hate relationships which are vital for a holistic understanding of the show. These relationships can be categorized in 2 distinct categories, heteronormative and non-heteronormative relationships. The heteronormative relationships are those which are based on heterosexual, whereas non-heteronormative ones are those usually based on same-sex or bisexual-oriented relationships. And I shall refer to non-heteronormative relationships as queer relationships. This study attempts to explore the queer relationships which are significant to the storyline of Game of Thrones. And furthermore, it also compares and contrasts the queer relationships with the heterosexual ones and draws conclusions related to the main plot. Any allegedly universal term. James Davidson writes, "Queer is in fact the most common solution to this modern crisis of utterance. A word so well traveled is equally at home in the 19th century drawing rooms, accommodating itself to whispered insinuation and on the streets of the 90s, where it raises its profile to that of an empowering slogan." Unquote. Hence, despite many controversies, the term queer has come to gain wide recognition from around the world. Max H. Kirsch defined the term as, quote, "the sampling of common beliefs about gender and sexuality from their representation in film, literature, and music to their placement in social and physical sciences. The activity of queer is the queering of culture, ranging from the reinterpretation of characters in novels and cinema to the deconstruction of historical analysis." Unquote. Thus, the term queer is not a monolithic system of rules or values, but a comprehensive intellectual collection of thoughts concerning sex, gender, and sexuality. Therefore, the theory encompasses a great many fields of thought and reflections within the scope of media, literature, and popular culture. According to Laura Palazzani, there exist 2 aspects which connote queerness: polymorphism and pansexuality. Polymorphism is a rejection of traditional sexual binarism. Queerness takes a stand against all forms of binary oppositions. Pansexuality, on the other hand, homosexuality should be rejected as a privileged sexual orientation. Pansexuality condemns heterosexuality and embraces polysexuality, which includes orientation of the same sex and of both sexes. Both polymorphism and pansexuality are clearly visible in the Game of Thrones, as a wide variety of sexual orientations is represented through different characters in the show. Queerness does not manifest itself only as homosexuality. This is also the case with Game of Thrones. On the contrary, it manifests itself by polysexuality and by a variation of queer identities. These include tomboys, butch lesbian characters, emasculated males called eunuchs, the diversity of bisexuals and incestuous relationships. All these distinct identities possess a unique place in the Game of Thrones storyline. In order to analyze Game of Thrones better, an understanding of the medieval setting is quite necessary. In medieval Europe, society was strictly controlled and dominated by the Catholic Church. In the medieval setting of Game of Thrones, there exist two main religions, the Old Gods and the Faith of the Seven. However, the dominant belief of Westeros is considered to be the Seven. In terms of gender, the Catholic faith imposed strict heteronormative classification on the European societies. Only males could become priests, move up in hierarchy, and were not allowed to get married. In Westeros, the situation is a bit different though. The Faith of the Seven employs male priests as septons and females as septa. In that sense, no distinction is made between the sexes. Nevertheless, the Faith of the Seven also conforms to and imposes strict heterosexual norms on the people or citizens of Westeros. In Game of Thrones, queer relationships are quite differentiated from heterosexual relationships, in the sense that they are not based on any sort of strategic alliance or on the sole interest of any of the noble families. Taking the setting into consideration, it was common for nobility to intermarry for strategic purposes. In Game of Thrones, the setting is not different. The most popular example of this is the marriage of former King Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister. Their relationship is one that came to exist solely for the strategic benefits of the House of Lannister and its patriarch, Tywin Lannister. Thanks to this marriage, the Lannister family held on to the Iron Throne at first and annexed the throne during the recent episodes, with Cersei becoming the queen of... In contrast with Yara's relationship, Rhaegar and Missandei's intimacy is pure, romantic, and spiritual. In conclusion, Game of Thrones deals with many themes, and one of these is definitely love and hate relationships. The manifestation of love relationship is central to the main plot and critical and significant to the outcome of power relations. Queer characters and queer relationships are widely represented in the show through a diverse selection of queer identities. In Game of Thrones, it can be stated that unlike heterosexual bonds, the queer relationships are not dependent on any type of personal or strategic interest. They are spontaneous, sincere, and unconditional manifestations of pure love. HBO's Game of Thrones has managed not only to create awareness to queer people, but also force people to accept them on the screen, just as they should do in real life. Yes, thank you.
Any idea when we'll be able to watch it next season?
It appears after 2 years.
In 2 years.
It's going to be the
I think I read somewhere that not watching Game of Thrones in 2017 is like living in 16th century London and not watching Shakespeare. It's my particular honor to be able to introduce our next speaker, Mahesh. He received his BA in American Culture and Literature from Başkent University in 2010 and his MA in American Culture and Literature from Hacettepe University in 2014. Currently, he is a research assistant in the Department of American Culture and Literature at Hacettepe University, where he is also pursuing his PhD studies.
Introduction. Okay, good morning. Well, first of all, my paper has nothing to do with queerness. Okay. Although often viewed as solely escapist literature, the West End continues to attract critical attention as a legitimate genre of American literature. in both literature and film, the Western has also been a key genre through which authors, scholars, artists, and filmmakers have established standards of American masculinity and male identity. The issues that Westerns have addressed, nationalism, honor, family, politics, and capitalism, all intersect with masculinity. Westerns have appeared in American literature since the late 19th century, and in all of the variations of this genre, manliness remains a focus. As a matter of fact, one of the indispensable elements of Westerns is the cowboy. Few figures have as powerful and persistent impact on representations of American masculinity as this icon. Popularized and romanticized during the late 19th century in Western dime novels, frontier melodramas, and Wild West shows starring Buffalo Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok, the cowboy became an enduring icon in the 20th century through fiction, film, television, and advertising. As Brett Carroll argues in American Masculinities, in figures such as the title characters of Owen Whistler's best-selling novel, The Virginian, Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage, Larry McMurtry's Horseman Pass By, the silent film star William Hart, the actor John Wayne, and the Marlboro Man, the cowboy has embodied the image of a rugged and authentic all-American masculinity. Moreover, as William Savage discusses in The Cowboy Hero, his image in American history and culture, throughout its history, this symbol has also reflected concerns over the social and economic status of white Anglo-American men and the emasculating effects of urbanization, industrialization, and bureaucratization. In spite of cowboys' historical status as a poorly paid laborer within the American free enterprise system, the image of the cowboy and his horse represents the fantasy of masculine autonomy and mobility, a life free from urban concerns, the domestic sphere, emotional attachments, and the feminizing influences of civilization. Thus, in American culture and literature, the cowboy has always been a contradictory figure. While he has embodied concerns over the fate of traditional masculinity in the modern capitalist society, the cowboy image itself has become a mass commodity. By the mid-20s, John grows up on the ranch and assumes he will live there until he dies, as his grandfather has. There is, as Edward Arnold states, a mythical West embodied in the family ranch. The ranch is John's reality. However, as a place that encompasses both myth and reality to define itself, it is in itself an illusion. This affects John Grady's identity because his identity is in part an illusion. A piece of the problem John faces in adopting the modernity is because on the ranch, he has been partially insulated from the growing cultural influences of modernity and has been able to live historic life. Contemporary Western historian Robert Athian asserts that by the end of the 1940s, the West was out of fashion. The land was there, but the romance was gone. It was like a passionate relationship gone stale, and one-time object of affection now appeared to be quite plain and unprovocative. John lives during a time when the entirety of his identity is not so much under attack as disintegrating. Having been raised on his grandfather's ranch has prevented him from having to consider other ways of identifying himself, and having to leave the ranch forces him to navigate in an unfamiliar world. The majority of John's story takes place in Mexico, but there are a few meaningful scenes prior to the protagonist leaving his Texan home and heading south. The first such scene displays John riding out on the ranch in an attempt to temporarily escape his bleak reality. He stops and dismounts when he sees something unidentifying in the grass, and he stood like a man come to the end of something. There was an old horse skull in the brush, and he squatted and picked it up and turned it in his hands. He studies the skull and then delivers the first of many internal narratives about horses. What he loved in horses was what he loved in men, the blood and the heel of the blood that ran them. He is connected to horses in a way few people could be, and the skull in his hands, much like the title of the novel, foreshadows the fidelity of purpose in this connection. The skull delivers a conclusive message regarding the death of not only John Brady's grandfather and the ranch, but symbolically of the horse, the animal the West that made the animal in the West that made the mythic West possible in the first place. There is also a connection to the title which speaks clearly to the demise of the Western lifestyle. The second significant scene related to John's obsessive love for the horses is the picture book horses scene, which comes up repeatedly in the novel. In this part of the novel, John evaluates a painting as it hangs in his grandfather's house. 6 horses with wild eyes and flowing manes are bleeding out of a corral. The horses are Spanish-blooded, and despite being painted in a Western setting, John Grady recognizes their conformations as worthless or working cattle. The horses are painted as replicas from a replica, so far removed from real horses that they are no more than artistic representations at many levels. McCarthy sets them up as pretty horses from the lullaby after which the title is named, yet we know they are unreal. It is these horses about which John dreams, and it is these horses that makes his identity particularly unstable. It is generally accepted among historians and cultural anthropologists, such as David Derry, the author of Cowboy Culture, that magazine articles and romantic dime novels influenced the young men already working as cowboys. Some of the cowhands began to picture themselves as rugged individuals, like the characters in the stories they read. John and Lacey, another cowboy character from the book, are really cowboys from the ranching families, but their experiences outside the ranch colors who they become on and off the ranch. The Western myth has grown to such a proportions that it has encompassed itself. Similar to horses on the picture book, they are cowboys, yet they are the replicas of cowboys. Along with picture book horses, McCarthy emphasized the degree to which John Grady is connected to horses by always having him in times of trial return to thoughts of, dreams of, or experiences with horses. By returning to these thoughts about horses and dreams about horses, John slips from reality to his alternative and to a world that is all about horses. To regain composure after being shot at the end of the novel, John talks to his horse Redbow and finds himself breathing in rhythm with the horse as if some part of the horse were within him breathing, and then he descended into some deeper collision for which he hadn't even a name. He stabilized his mood by encompassing or perhaps borrowing something from the horse. As suggested in the novel, John was determined to get 4 horses out of the stable yard if he died in the road, and beyond that, he hadn't touched much. His leg was numb and bleeding and felt heavy as a sack of meal, and his boot was filling up with blood. His determination to reclaim the horses is completely at odds with survival. Yet his devotion to the ideal that he must make right wrongs supersedes any concept of practicality. For him, reclaiming stolen horses is more important than living. Like Whistler's The Virginian or McMurtry's Horseman Pass By, it is through horses that he exerts his vengeance and demonstrates for the Mexican man the tremendous determinations of an angry American cowboy. He is in some way making his own truth and claiming the power that accompanies it, short-lived though it may be. Through the end of the novel, he exerts this exclusively contextual power as he drags the kidnapped captain through the mountains. The bullet traveled straight through his leg and therefore doesn't need to be removed. He is, however, forced to cauterize the wound with the heated end of a rifle, and the pain is beyond what even he can endure. What he passes out from exhaustion and pain, he again dreams of horses. This time, his dream is not a picture book of horses. The horses in his dream moves gracefully among the tilted stones like horses come upon an antique site where some ordering of the world had failed, and if anything had been ridden on the stones, the weathers had taken it away again, and the horses were weary and moved with great circumspection, carrying in their blood as they dig the recollection of this and other places where horses once had been and will be again. Finally, what he saw in his dream was that the order in the horse's heart was more durable, for it was written on in a place where no rain would raise it. In the novel, John's last dream about horses reveals a more mature acceptance of the tragic nature of the world. This time, horses do not run, they move bravely. John seems to understand that he is raised by his country. He is alone in a world he perceives as wholly isolating to a cowboy because the ethics by which he lives and the places in which he wants to live no longer exist. To most contemporary Americans, both his identity and existence are irrelevant. After letting some Mexican bandits take the captain from him, McCarthy has John ride back into American soil, naked and weeping. He has no place to go, no frontier to chase, and reality has begun to creep into his mythic dreams of horses. As he rides through the town, people look at him as if he is some apparition out of vanished past. On American soil once again, McCarthy conveys that there is no admiration in the eyes of people who stare at him. His ill fate is apparent. In a scene that perhaps nods to the West and Western ethics as regretful casualties soon after his crossing back into the United States, McCarthy has John end up in a Texan court, having ironically been again accused of horse theft. After sharing his entire Mexican adventure with the courtroom, wherein his having killed a man in prison, the judge exonerates the boy. The fascinated judge asks him, "What would you have done if I had found you against you today?" "I don't know." "Well, that's a fair answer, I guess. For the love of the horse." "It wasn't their horse. It would have bothered me." Stealing horses means much more to him than taking another man's property. It means taking another man's identity. And he is not yet ready to relinquish the Western code, which punishes horse thefts and the significance of a horse-centered identity. The novel brings down with John returning to Lacey's horse, and then fiddly searching for Levin's family. John eventually rides off into darkening lands, and until sees of the plane, readers are left to speculate what has become of the misplaced boy. In conclusion, by writing about the lives of displaced cowboys and their horses, and then following them through the rejection of a previously celebrated myth and national embrace of the mechanized and nuclear progress, McCarthy makes a serious attempt at exposing the cultural complexities compromising the Western myth and the role of horses as necessary symbols for Western masculine identity. Unlike Wisters, who used the horse in constructing the cowboy myth, McCarthy uses the horse to expose the myth. While Wister contributed to creating a myth that defined a generation with a portrayal of characters accidentally mythic, McCarthy lays upon this myth. With the deaths of several protagonists and the much compromised lives of the others, McCarthy mocks the myth and presents for reader the national tragedy left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to thank all of you for staying perfectly within your time limits, by the way. Which means we have plenty of time for questions and comments to our three speakers. Can I ask a final question? Why exactly are the horses called pretty?
Well, it comes from a lullaby, indeed. So.
Welcome to our second session this morning. We have three bright young scholars ready to intrigue us. I read their abstracts and I got very excited. Our speakers will be exploring our conference theme, Love and Hate, from some very different angles. Papers will range from a post-apocalyptic dystopia set in an imaginary nation, guess which nation, to a dystopian future ruled by men, and to representations of schizophrenic love in two critically acclaimed films. I believe we will be hearing some strong social commentary in the award-winning Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins and in Kelly Sue DeConnick's comic book series Beach Planet. We will hear about contemporary films by Onur Ünlü and David Lynch, two wonderful film directors living and producing in far-flung countries. Our speaker will say that their modern-day fables feature a totally different aspect of love. So our speakers will cast a sharp eye on fantasy films, feminist sci-fi comic books, and dystopian novels, all very exciting. Let me introduce our first speaker this morning. Associate Professor Barbara Del Abate Çelebi is the author of Penelope's Daughters, La Letteratura in Gioco, and L'Alieno Dentro. She teaches in the Department of English Translation and Interpreting at Beykent University and visiting instructor in the Department of French Literature at Galatasaray University. And she holds a degree in modern languages and literatures from the University of Naples, L'Orientale, and a PhD in Italian literature from Istanbul University. She has taught English, Italian, and French literature in various universities, including Istanbul University, Koç University, and Free University of Brussels. Her paper topic today is Love and Death as Instruments of Propaganda in the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins.
Can someone need to open my presentation? Can you hear me? First of all, I apologize for my voice, so I will have to speak slowly and also drink some water now and then. So as you see, my presentation is going to be on a very famous, popular, dystopian novel for young adults. So as most of you are young adults, I guess most of you, many of you, have read the novel or watched the film. Can you just tell me how many people know the novel? Okay, fantastic. So most of you know the novel. What is the aim of my presentation today? I will try to investigate the potential for agency in a futuristic, capitalistic, consumeristic, dystopic society within this young adult dystopic series that is the Hunger Games. There are 3 books published between 2008 and 2010 written by Susan Collins. In the first part, so the menu for today, in the first part I will introduce, for the one that they don't know about it, the plot and character of the novel within the context of truth, simulation, real, virtual. In the second part, I will explore how love and death are utilized as commodities and as instruments of propaganda. So, when we talk about the Hunger Games, we are talking about this trilogy. It was a very successful trilogy. More than 27 million books have been sold. In 2012, also there was a very, very popular, successful series of films, 4 films. This is actually a dystopic young adult fiction, and because it's actually targeted to young people, there is a balance between the darker admonitory impulses of adult dystopian text, which usually concludes with the protagonist's final defeat and failure. But here, actually, as you know, most of you know, is more of a romantic, happily ever after ending. So this makes this dystopian society, dystopian picture a little bit lighter, sweeter. Of course, we also have to say that this is mainly concentrated on a love triangle. The protagonists, I'm going to use him, of course, and their survival within the arena. They also have help from Hamich, and they simulate to be star-crossed lovers, even if, at least from Katniss' point of view, this is not true. This role, this fake role, will help them to win the hearts of the audience, receive food, medicine, and at the end they will be the winner of the 74th Hunger Games. So, let's first of all ruled by force alone, but also by ideas. So throughout the Hunger Games trilogy, the capital is able to anesthetize any critical thinking through entertainment, and this allows President Snow to oppress people. This is very well evidenced by the fact that the residents of capital do not seem to have any political consciousness of their status, and the residents of the district regard themselves as having little to no control over their futures. Colin's message is clear: to maintain order, one has only to strip people of their social consciousness. To retain the ability to think critically and ask questions is to reserve the power to challenge the status quo and replace it with a new social order. I conclude with the saying by Albert Einstein, unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Del Abate Çelebi, for this very interesting post-apocalyptic United States. Let us spare our questions until after all of our papers are presented. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker, our dear student, Kaan Gazne, MA student at the moment. Kaan Gazne graduated from our department last year, and right now his areas of interest in our MA program include poetry, graphic novels, cultural studies, and comparative literature. From his very first freshman year, we could predict his interests in the English profession, and a very bright future is ahead of Kaan Gazne. Let's hear what he has to say today. His paper topic is Dystopian Misogyny, Feminist Theory in Kelly Sue DeConnick's comic book series, Bitch Planet.
Thank you. My topic will be focusing on more about the hate aspect of the conference rather than love section. So it's going to be a bit dark, I guess. Although the civil rights movement led the way for African American equality during the 1960s, activist women struggled to find a permanent place in the movement since key leaders such as Stokely Carmichael were openly discriminating against them and marginalizing their concerns. During the second half of the 1960s, a new wave of feminism emerged out of women's frustration with this sexism and misogyny. In order to voice their concerns in the political arena, American second-wave feminists founded National Organization for Women, aka NOW, in 1966 under the leadership of Betty Friedan. However, NOW was too white, heterosexual, middle class, and out of touch according to many younger women. So many people thought that it wasn't for them. Moreover, women of color, radical women, working class women, queer women were ignored or sometimes outright rejected. Marginalized by mainstream feminists, many of these individuals looked to women's liberation, a more radical branch of feminism which focused on consciousness raising and social action for answers. Women's liberationists were also committed to theory making and expressed their revolutionary social and political ideas through countless essays and manifestos such as Joe Freeman's Beach Manifesto, the Red Stockings Manifesto, and the Radical Lesbians' The Woman Identified Woman. These crucial texts set the stage for the feminist writing and activism that would come to define the 1970s. Kelly Sue DeConnick's and Valentine DeLandro's comic book series, Witch Planet, is a modern adaptation of the issues expressed in 1970s feminist theory. Witch Planet takes place in a dystopian future ruled by men, where disobedient women, those who refuse to conform to traditional female gender roles, such as being subordinate, attractive, obedient housewives, are exiled to a different planet called Witch Planet as a punishment. In this dystopian future, men control society, and their leaders, referred to as fathers, control everything, and reinforce the father knows best patriarchal ideology that women's liberationists tried to, but could not completely deconstruct. Women living in this misogynistic dystopia are subjected to harassment and exploitation. And if they try to oppose it, in other words, if they try to challenge the male utopia the fathers are trying to construct, they are sent to Witch Planet for their crimes. Although Witch Planet takes place in a dystopian future, it uses theoretical framework of 1970s radical second-wave feminism to explore the problems of contemporary American women. For example, the main characters who are trying to escape Witch Planet's prison share the same attributes mentioned in the Witch Manifesto. They are aggressive, strong-minded, competitive, big, tall, and pushy. They are fighting to end injustice, inequality, and misogyny. Sexploitation, heterosexism, and manipulation of women's bodies by the capitalist system, all important 1970s feminist issues, are also running themes in Witch Planet. Moreover, the comic book series also suggests that while feminist activism has certainly improved women's lives, and in many ways they still suffer from the same oppressive institutions, and their rights are always in danger of being taken away by the fathers, a theme with a great deal of contemporary relevance. As DeConnick describes, in this world, if you are a woman who does not fit in the box assigned to her, if you are too loud or too opinionated, too quiet or too religious, too atheist, too black, too brown, too any of the things that they don't want you to be, you are labeled non-compliant. And if you are deemed terminally non-compliant, you are shipped off to an auxiliary compliance outpost that is colloquially referred to as Witch Planet. Similar to today's world of prisons, most of the inmates in Witch Planet are colored women. And this women in prison image is evocative of the exploitation movies of 1960s. Misogyny is present in different shapes and forms throughout the comic, such as the cover of the first issue, as you can see here. It features a silhouette of a naked woman giving the finger to man while being chained with a bright pink-colored background. And here you can see the subtitle, "Are you woman enough to survive?" Because in this world, you have to be a woman to survive, because men will pretty much everything, right? Men don't need to survive anything. Being chained while being naked gives the impression of a sexual exploitation of female body without her will. Physical and sexual abuse of female body remains as a recurring motif throughout the series. Abuse takes place in many different shapes and forms, and first example of it can be seen on the first starting pages of the first issue. When Penny confronts the one-size-fits-all ideology, she is beaten by a nightstick, a phallic object representing male authority. And Penny, as I will mention in the future, is a relatively ugly woman, overweight, and pretty much confront everything that father's trying to construct. Although Beach Planet takes place in a futuristic dystopia, it still deals with contemporary issues, like sexual harassment in the workplace. As you can see here on the first page of the second issue, a guy, presumably one of the fathers or owners of the place, keeps on spanking every waitress that pass by, and victims of this harassment cannot do anything about it, since they will be deemed non-compliant and sent to beach prison. And here on the right column, you can see how much he enjoys doing that. He's smiling and all happy about it. Similar issue is present in today's workplaces. Women are last to be hired and first to be fired. So in order to keep their jobs, many women remain silent on the face of similar issues. It is not an uncommon issue for owners to harass their assistants and secretaries or use scare tactics to force them into their will. Non-conformist women who are trying to escape Beach Planet's prison share the same attributes mentioned in the Beach Manifesto. Beach Manifesto was written by political activist Joe Freeman in 1968. Beach has a negative connotation attached to it. It is used to degrade women who refuse to play by the rules of man. As Freeman states, Beach serves the social function of isolating and discrediting a class of people who do not conform to socially accepted patterns of behavior. This creates the basis of Kelly Sue DeConnick's work, Beach Planet. In its most literal sense, women who do not conform to socially accepted patterns of behavior are sent to a different planet to be isolated from society. Society deems those women dangerous to its existence because they are the ones that criticize how this society functions. In Turkey, and nothing is being done about it. Feminists are still labeled as bitches by men. While the series is dark in both narration and artistic style, there is still a glimmer of hope for women fighting for their rights. With Eleanor Dawn's resurgence and Kamal Kogo's leadership, women's rights activists gained the momentum against the fight against patriarchal fathers. However, in reality, things are a bit different. With Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, the United States has entered a new era of misogyny and patriarchal male dominance. Despite his sexual and racist remarks, Americans still elected him, suggesting that there is still a lot of work to be done and lessons to be learned before the country is ready for a female president. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaan Gazmet, for your wonderful presentation on this cultural satire. I already think that we need more feminist comic book creators in the future. Our third speaker is Bülent Ay-Yıldız, another very dear colleague and friend at the Department of American Culture and Literature. Another colleague who has a very promising future career ahead, and he has a wide range of interests on visual culture, media studies, and contemporary American novel. For his presentation today, he picked Schizophrenic Love. He will be comparing two film directors, Onur Ünlü and David Lynch, from the standpoint of fantasy matters, and his presentation title is Man is Made of Anxiety, Schizophrenic Love, Fantasy and Violence in Thou Gild'st the Even, Sen Aydınlatırsın Geceyi, and Lost Highway.
Thank you for the introduction. So, hello everyone. I'm going to compare two movies in my presentation. One is Thou Gild'st the Even by Onur Ünlü, and the other one is Lost Highway by David Lynch. If you have watched these movies, or if you are familiar with these directors, I think you can easily realize they're very irrelevant. I mean, they're apples and oranges. But the manifestations of love and hate bring them closer. So, and before I begin, I should warn you about spoilers. There are hardcore spoilers. So for those who haven't watched them, I'm sorry. Okay. In Onur'un movies, especially in Thou Gil's Steven and in David Lynch's Lost Highway, the fantastic elements present schizophrenic tendencies of the male characters who experience traumatic events in their pasts and are incapable of initiating healthy relationships. As a result of being unable to separate fantasy from reality, they create their own worlds, which lead them to self-destruction and violence, especially against women. Schizophrenia is an ambiguous term to define since psychologists and experts could not come up with a common definition. It has different meanings, types, and interpretations, even in the clinical context. Beyond medical definitions, there are culturally attributed meanings to the illness. For example, Michel Foucault claims that schizophrenia gains meaning within a discourse, and those who were considered abnormal labeled as mad. As he states, at the same time, the madness assigned to this same madness a spatial sign, not that of sickness, but that of glorified scandal. The clinical term strips itself off, and it is analyzed within a social context. More than a disease, he interprets the disease as an ideological phenomenon. Louis Sass focuses on the relationship between madness and art, trying to define schizophrenia within a modern discourse. As he states, quote, "The history of modern psychiatry is, in fact, practically synonymous with the history of schizophrenia, the quintessential form of madness in our time," unquote. So in this work, rather than a clinic term, schizophrenia will be used as a state of distortion and fantasy in which characters experience self-absorption, post-trauma, paranoia, and delusion, which are general symptoms of the disease in popular culture. The characters created in his films have characteristic traumatic experiences that might cause their delusional visions. In Thou Gil's Steven, Jamal, the protagonist, has mental problems. His mother and brothers died in a fire, which seems as the main cause of Jamal's depressive state. The town depicted in the movie has two suns and moons. There are characters with different supernatural powers. For example, this one is a giant. And there's another character, Dündar is a man who cannot die. And Samim can use hands as a rifle. However, the director does not explicitly say that this is a distorted view of Jamal. It might really be a supernatural world, but the mental disturbance is indirectly implied through Jamal's use of medicine and consultation. Moreover, his obsessive connection with the past might be another indicator. He either remembers or mentions the fire, which implies that he cannot overcome the terrible event. He visits his mother's tomb and criticizes his father for ignoring it. He also searches for a necklace in which his mother's photograph is hidden. Obviously, Jamal tries to keep alive his connection with the past. In Lost Highway, Fred Madison has a problematic relationship with his wife, Renee Madison. Though at the first glance, the couple seems normal, there is a subtle disturbance between them. Here is the scene that the problem is revealed between the couple.
You don't mind if I'm not coming to the club tonight?
What are you gonna do?
Stay home. Read.
Read. Read. Read what?
So the voice is a little low, so I can transcribe the last sentence. The problematic relationship is implied when Fred says, "It is nice or not, it is Jamal's imagination." Although the women are depicted as evil betrayers and are exposed to violence, the male characters are in search of women to love. External violence indicates two main things for the disturbed mind. Firstly, losing the desired object and regaining it turns into a fantasy. Second, they direct their self-hatred to others to postpone self-destruction. Fred, by killing his wife, destroys the desired object, but she reappears in his fantasy world. Freud's death drive is defined as the opposite of life instinct. It is a drive which explains why humans are drawn to repeat painful or traumatic events. The subject falls in the search of repetition for joy, which leads to a destruction. To avoid this loop, violence is conducted to others. Freud states that, quote, "It really seems as though it is necessary for us to destroy some other thing or person in order not to destroy ourselves, in order to guard against the impulsion to self-destruction." However, the subject expects the violence to return back to him so that the self-destruction is completed. And loss of time is another effect of schizophrenia or love for the characters. Considered as subtype of schizophrenia, catatonia might reveal an interesting approach for the concept of time. Kerry McNally states that, for many, the quintessential person suffering from catatonia is one who remains frozen for long periods of time. Unquote. Motionlessness or numbness may indicate a different understanding of time. The catatonic people stand still for a long time. They do not move, which is similar to Jamal's case. He also stops for a long time, especially when he sees a spinning top. A significant example for the perplexed time concept is Jamal returns Shakespeare's book to the bookseller, Damla, who predicts the future and says, "I knew you will come back and we will hang out together." Jamal does not understand what she means. Damla claps her hands and the time stops, which is similar to static condition of the catatonic patients. But ironically, at the end of the movie, Jamal chops her hands off and uses them to stop time and tries to prevent Yasemin from flying to Istanbul. So the time stops. However, when he claps the hands again, the time does not start. He remains in a timeless purgatory and does not know what to do. The movie ends ambiguously, leaving Jamal in the middle of nowhere and in timelessness. Again, the time is distorted when he attempts to regain the desired object, which causes a more catatonic and traumatic state. The characters and the audience's understanding of time are intentionally perplexed to comprehend the time-space of schizophrenic characters. For example, in Lost Highway, Fred Madison follows a circular path from the announcement of the death of Dick Laurent to the same announcement. Here is the beginning of the movie, Lost Highway. So this is how the movie begins, and at the end of the movie, we learn that who speaks to the speaker, Fred himself. And this is the end of the movie.
Dick Morant is dead.
So while we are watching this story has already happened. So it is not a linear time progress, but something beyond ordinary and stable. Similar. Similarly, Jamal turns back to the point where he started his story. Moreover, the notion of death stands as a symbol for escape, because Jamal feels like he's stuck in this little county and death might be a key to freedom. Atif is an immortal character in the movie, but for him it is not something to be proud of. He regrets being immortal because he believes that immortality makes humans shameless, and he says, knowing everything and knowing nothing is the same thing. Both of them make you senseless. Shameless. No, senseless, sorry. So, in conclusion, the main characters of two movies display schizophrenic symptoms as they experience environmental trauma that could be probable cause of mental distortion. They cannot overcome the effects of catastrophic events in their lives, which led them to isolation and social disorders. In order to find peace, the characters chase after their desired objects, but constantly fail to reach them since they do not really find the desired object. What they do is postponing the moment of retrieving, as the death drive motivates them. They subconsciously move themselves through self-destruction, but the violence against female characters function as a way of delay and destroying the desired object. In this sense, the adoration or feeling love for the female characters turn into a schizophrenia, and they blur the line between reality and fantasy, which opens up a space in mimetic world filled with fantastic elements. Thank you.
I would like to thank all of our presenters for such thought-provoking, such interesting papers. We don't have time left, but let's take a couple of questions. Any questions? Yes?
Well, just a simple question to our friend just presented.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? I'm Meltem Kıraro from Başkent University. It is always a great honor and a pleasure to come back to Hacettepe University, where I graduated from. And today I have the honor of presenting three wonderful speeches by three great scholars. Our first speaker is from Italy. I met her 3 years ago, in Naples. And I hope I will be meeting her again in Rome, in Milan, in Florence, and in Turkey, or anywhere in Italy for that matter. Thank you very much. It's been a great surprise seeing you here. Come back again. Elisabetta Marino is now an assistant professor, associate professor of English and American literature for about 10 days now. Yes. Congratulations. At the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. She is the author of 4 monographs, a volume on the figure of Tamerlane in British and American literature, an introduction to British Bangladeshi literature, a study on the relationship between Mary Shelley and Italy, and an analysis of the romantic dramas on a mythological subject. She has translated poems by Maria Mazziotti Gillen and has also co-edited 8 collections of essays. She has published extensively on travel literature, Asian American and British literature, Italian American literature, and the English romantic writers. Today, she will be talking on a very interesting topic. The title is Oscillating Between Love and Hate, the Italian-American experience in Toni Ardizzone's In the Garden of Papa Santuzzo.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Every time there is a conference in Turkey, I get the chance to see good friends. So I'm really happy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the author. I don't think many. Okay, great. So it's going to be a good discovery, I hope. So, born in Chicago in 1949, Tony Avdizzone is the award-winning author of 8 books of fiction, as well as being an academic. He's emeritus professor of English at Indiana University Bloomington, and one of the most prominent American writers of Sicilian origin. Released in 1999, In the Garden of Papa Santuzzu is his 3rd novel, which, as underlined in a 2017 interview, contributes to filling a major void, since up until its publication, quote, there was no novel that told the story of the southern Italian movement to the Americas, end of quote. Set at the beginning of the 20th century, the plot is focused on a large Sicilian family from Agrigento, whose old and almost blind patriarch, Papa Santuzzu, decides to push his 7 children, one by one, out of the nest to pursue the American dream. In the elderly man's imagination, La America, because they spell it in this way, is a blooming Garden of Eden, where his cherished offspring, sheltered from the hardships of life endured in their mother country, will be granted the extraordinary opportunity to thrive and forget all about their past misery. Needless to say, the reality they're confronted with turns out to be rather different. The selfless act of love of Papa Santuzzu, who remains alone with his buried wife, his white-haired donkey, and the barren fields he tends on behalf of a despotic baroni, the baroni is some kind of a tyrant, the owner of the field, turns, at least initially, into a source of pain, uneasiness, and even social ostracism. Furthermore, in the strenuous effort to earn a decent living, the siblings drift apart, scattered throughout the US from New York to California. Despite the ordeals encountered by the protagonists, the novel has a positive ending. The siblings somehow reunite at the funeral of Gaetano, the eldest among the brothers, and a much-awaited visit to Sicily with the younger American-born generations is hinted at, suggesting a continuity between past, present, and future. Avdizzone began to write the initial chapters of his narrative in the 1890s, before returning to the project almost 10 years later. It took him 7 years to give a definitive shape to his story, years in which he researched libraries and archives, besides pondering over popular anecdotes and the oral histories passed down within his family. The writer credits Italo Calvino's Italian folk tales as an important source of inspiration. In the Garden of Papa Santuzzu, in fact, real stories are often disguised as fables and folk tales. Moreover, the rhyming couplets that end each chapter are modeled on Calvino's conclusion of the tales from southern Italy. Maxinon Kingston's Chinaman also exercised a potent fascination over his mind. As Avdizzone related to Olivia Kate Cerrone, one of his numerous interviewers, Kingston, quote, not only tells the story of a people, but also imagines 3 different ways that a grandfather might have come to the Americas, end of quote. Defined by Publisher Weekly as a kind of Sicilian Canterbury Tales, identified by Joseph Ghibaldi as a Sicilian-American version of Boccaccio's Decameron, In the Garden of Papa Santuzzu is a polyphonic text, divided into 14 chapters narrated by 12 different characters, the children and grandchildren of Papa Santuzzu, each relating in the first person either the story of how he or she left her mother country, or the vicissitude faced in America, or at times both. As this paper sets out to elucidate binarism, the opposition between love and hate, the tension between belonging and estrangement dominate the first part of the narrative, thus reflecting the actual experience of many immigrants, not just Italian or Sicilian, caught in a perpetual oscillation between contrasting feelings towards their mother country and America, an oscillation which unavoidably hindered their progress. As will be shown, however, as the story proceeds, Tony Aldizzone forcefully succeeds in securing the advancement of his characters, thus dressing, at least in fiction, the wounds of history, by replacing the logic of mutual exclusion with a notion of inclusiveness, signified by the growing emphasis placed on sharing one's talent with an extended community, whose boundaries stretch beyond those of ethnicity, nationality, and even time. A vast number of Sicilian immigrants conceived migration as a temporary solution, since they felt they could not sever the roots from which they still derived their vital nourishment. Compared to birds of passage, this is a definition of Fred Gardafi, they were eager to return to their nests, once acquired the financial resources necessary to provide for the needs of their families back home. In the words of the Gaetano, quote, "All I hoped for was a chance to labor in the new land for 1 or 2 years, fill my empty pockets with a few bags of gold, and then return home with enough money to ease my family's miseria," end of quote. Yet, many decided to eventually settle in the promised land, struggling to put away enough of their savings to buy a one-way ticket for the remaining members of the household, another possibility recurrently contemplated by Aldizzone's character. These two alternative options reflect the mixed feelings oscillating between love and hate, suspended between nostalgia and rejection, immigrants harbored towards the land of their ancestors. When Salvatore, the last of Papa Santuzzo's sons, and his wife Rosa bid what they believe is their final adieu to Sicily, they utter the following emblematic sentence, and I quote, "Sicily, I cannot live with you, nor can I live without you," end of quote. Identical words are pronounced at the end of the novel, when, after many years, Rosa finally returns to Agrigento together with the grandchildren, and I quote, "Ah, bella Sicilia," which means beautiful Sicily. "I cannot live with you, nor can I live without you," end of quote. The same destabilizing fluctuation between extremes is featured in the narrative when characters envisage and later on experience life in the land of opportunities. Papa Santuzzo arouses the expectations of his children as well as feeding their imagination when he depicts America as a wondrous and incredibly fertile place where trees are always laden with fruit and a simple seed pushed into the soil instantly grows into a huge plant. In L'America, as he continues, seas and rivers lip with fish. No man ever goes to sleep with an empty stomach, while mountains are, quote, "filled with so much gold that roads are actually paved with it," end of quote. Nonetheless, as soon as they begin to appreciate the abundance of opportunities truly bestowed by the new world, the patriarch's children realize that the garden, as Carla, the firstborn daughter, resentfully observes, is, quote, "a garden full of scorpions and snakes and spiders," end of quote. Indeed, far from nurturing and providing for those who rely on its bounty, America, with its
to cover up my ignorance, and I looked up the author and to see whether it was translated into Turkish. I have no information on that so far. Not yet.
Not yet.
But he should be translated, so thank you very much. We have a young and upcoming scholar next, who is going to deal with a topic that is very close to my heart. Gürrenk Hayırcıl Oral is a PhD student in Americanistic and Anglistic in Social Sciences at the Essen-Duisburg University in Germany. She is interested in African American and Black British literature, cultural memory, and trauma studies. She currently teaches English poetry, English novels, and comparative literature at Beykent University in Istanbul. Her last presentation was on cultural memory in Zadie Smith's novels at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara. She is also involved in the Afro-Turkish Association in Izmir, where she actively applies and experiences various theories of cultural memory. Her paper is entitled A Daughter's Trauma, Love and Hatred Towards Mothers in 20th Century African American Women's Literature.
Thanks for a nice introduction. Actually, that's my second ASAT conference. I attended the ASAT conference the first time when I was a sophomore student, and but I'm still excited like at the first time. So today I want to talk about a daughter's trauma, especially about the love and hatred relationships of mothers and daughters, especially in African American women's literature. And I have focused that on neo-slave narratives. So when dealing with like mother's struggles, one cannot avoid mentioning the experience during slavery, as these determine the grandchildren's social behavior and family relations at the turn of the 20th century. So there were a lot of traumatic events, but especially women had to endure a double burden, like rape, racism, and sexism. And so there is, the first thing that I want to mention is rape. Slave masters brutalized black girls and women, justifying the dehumanizing treatment by labeling them sexual savages, stripped, beaten, raped, and forced to work as breed cells. Black women suffered a double burden under slavery because of their sex. And so women were not able to protect themselves, and they were also not able to protect their own daughters. So a slave girl was expected to have children as soon as she became a woman. Some of them had children at the age of 12 or even 13. And as a result, motherhood for black women was bittersweet. The joy of motherhood combined with the reality of breeding property for the slave society. And these traumatic experiences are all influencing the mother-child relationship. Oliver in Die Entwicklung der Traumatheorie in der Psychoanalyse argues that while the generation that suffered directly is unable to handle their experiences because of fear, the hate impulse, or other forms of retrogression or Ich-Regression, they are also mostly unable to respond to the psychological and social needs of their children, so that the extreme trauma of the parents influences the children as a cumulative trauma. So the child did not experience the trauma itself and still tries to understand the parents, as such division in the identity of the child follows. According again to Bolivar, as the children live in two realities, their own world and in the traumatic history of their parents. So narratives about women's traumas are important as they go unnoticed and are often denied. According to Vickrow, the frequent focus on mother-child relations, especially of those of mother-daughters, provide a locus for considering many social, cultural aspects of trauma. So Vickrow says, these intimate relationships bear the effects of social, cultural, and economic mediations more powerfully because of traumatic circumstances.
as their identities are formed in these circumstances. Daughters feel a conflicted, protective fearfulness toward their mothers and the dread of reliving their mother's trauma. So, rather than emphasis on the trauma of mothers, we can see that the 20th century women's literature, especially by women of African descent, focuses on the trauma experienced by the daughters. Hirsch, for example, in her article says, or focuses on the question of why the stories of mothers are rarely told from the point of view of mothers. So, as fact, women speak and write as daughters more than they do as daughters. Here we have a quote. She says, "The adult woman is a mother, in particular, continues to exist only in relation to her child, never as a subject in her own right. And in her maternal function, she remains an object, always distant, always idealized or denigrated, always mystified, always represented through the small child's point of view." And so this kind of traumatic cultural memory influences or is also seen in African American women's literature, especially in the neo-slave narratives. And these are seen as the teaching method, where mothers insistently try to teach their daughters how to survive in a racist and sexist world, while the daughters rejects her mother's experience as invalid or in changing social times. Then we have a mirror effect. Mothers who look at the daughters see themselves. She's constantly reminded of her mistakes, yearnings, dreams, success, and failures. When the daughter looks at her mother, she sees herself and rejects the image. And this is called matrophobia. This is an illness that creates a fear of becoming one's own mother. Okay. And then we have separation. Daughters are torn between wishing to be an extension of their mothers and yearning for their own autonomy. Then we have powerless mothers. Children confront and rely upon a powerful maternal presence, only to watch her become powerless in front of the father, the teacher, the judge, the landlord, the whole world, right? So mothers, there are also mothers who are powerless because they murder and put children up for adoption or consider abortion when they feel that they cannot protect the child from the hostile world. So, yeah, and I just picked up 3 books that I want to look closely at, and the first book is Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I guess everyone has read that before. Okay, so I looked at that book, and I was just, Sarah is obviously a mother figure, but she's also a daughter figure in that book, so we have both point of views. So Sadie as a daughter figure is, she has some problems with her mother because she has not an intimate relationship to her, and the only thing that she can remember is the circle with the cross, the mark on her mother's body. And so Sadie never got the chance to bond with her mother, which means she never had the chance to be a real daughter to anyone. And the fact that Sadie could not even find her mother's body nor know why her mother was killed emphasizes her lack of relationship with her own mother, as well as her
Professor Arda Arıkan, who completed his PhD at Penn State University in the field of multilingual and multicultural education, language and literature instruction in 2002. In 2010, he received the title of Associate Professor in the field of English Language Education and became a full professor in September 2016. He is currently employed at Akdeniz University, Faculty of Letters, Department of English Language and Literature. He continues his scientific studies as a generalist by reading and writing on education, literature, and culture. With this paper, we are moving from fiction into autobiography and travel literature, and of course, the paper has musical overtones. It is entitled, "There is no home and nobody to return to anyhow, on Eartha Kitt's travels around the world."
person. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers, and I would like to thank Tafer Hocam for giving me this topic, lending me this topic for excavation. And because of her paying it forward, I have had days and nights of sorrow, pain, and but that learned me a lot. Before I start again, I would like to share some photos and a few clips about Eartha Kitt, about whom I'm going to talk today. I have read 2 of her autobiographies and also read a biography by Williams on her, but that was written after she died. So let me start with the photographs. Yes. It's interesting. Eartha Kitt looks like a black woman to me. I don't know how she looks to you, but in her autobiography, she, almost always brings this forward. She's a, half white, half black person. That she has some ancestors. She has some ancestors in Africa, and so on. And she distances herself from the blacks, but she also pays almost all of her money to the cause, which is Malcolm X, and so on. So she's a very different character, unique character. She acted in, she acted as Catwoman, and she called herself Sex Kitten, and she enjoyed this. And we are talking about 1940s and 50s, during which blacks had to use the back doors of the restaurants and places, public places. And she enjoyed reading. She always wanted to be an independent woman. She underlined the importance of that. And she came to Turkey. But as I will explain in a few minutes, that her memories are kind of, problematic as well. She has some dim memories, as the biographer also mentioned. Let me tell you about this Üsküdar'a. She calls it Üsküdar'a, and she has a weak memory about this. The interesting thing is that in her autobiography, she writes that this song was taught onto her at a woman's, at a lady's home in the kitchen, that she was preparing dinner for her husband, who was supposed to be an admiral. I did some research, and I found out that there's only one person who could that person be, and that is Hamiyet Yücesiz. Because her husband was an admiral, and she had a son. But the thing is that Hamiyet Yücesiz's husband died almost 10 years before the moment they met. But there is a confusion in her memories. Is something happening? Okay. Now I will see it. Yeah. Okay.
very many strange ways. Along with these strange ways go very many strange things. And one of them is means I like to feed my lover bird's milk.
I know you are enjoying it, but I have a presentation to catch, so we can say a lot about this video clip, but this was one of the hottest, top 10 music, sensational music stuff during her time in 1940s, and it made her a great hit.
Can anyone live with her as a kid?
That's not for me to decide.
Okay. At some point in her life, there are some CIA reports about her stating that she was a sex-hungry nymphomaniac, that she enjoyed, beating her men and so on, something like that. On the other hand, well, who would trust CIA files anyway? But another thing is that she, as you watch her films, she has many, multiple identities, I would call, and I'm going to talk about that later. She was a seriously victimized person. She was a victim of trauma, and we have to understand her as such. And I would like to share a video talking about why she doesn't have a boyfriend and if she is ready to compromise for that.
That's for someone who decides to live with me to decide, not for me.
But are you willing to compromise within a relationship?
To compromise? What's compromising? Compromising for what? Compromising for what reason? To compromise for what? To compromise. What is compromise?
If a man came into your life, wouldn't you want to compromise?
Stupid. A man comes into my life and I have to compromise? You must think about that one again. A man comes into my life and you have to compromise for what? For what? For what?
Yeah, for what? That's what I wonder myself. Why compromise? But today, Elizabetha talked about her novel character who said about Sicily, I cannot live with you, nor I cannot live without you. And Gülrenk, at the same time, she talked about, she linked trauma to territorial isolation, and how Hirsch, in Hirsch's words, mothers are idealized in such traumatic cases and so on, and we have similar stuff going on in her life. Well, you can find a lot of things, but what I've found as a younger person than Gülrenk, well, it's very different. It's very difficult to read autobiographies because there are very personal stories mixed and mingle and so on. But she is not normal, and we have to know a lot about trauma, a lot about. She is unique. She has no sense of politeness. For instance, she talks about lesbians, a lesbian woman, and she says, I think that's a great loss for her that she doesn't get, perfect feeling a man can give to you. So, today's standards, that would, sound kind of. I'm talking about the standards of out somewhere, Europe or United States, of course, not Turkey, but. In today's standards, she's not politically correct, and she never meant to be. And studying her, is very difficult. You cannot be politically correct. But that's what I found about her, and I'm very happy to have studied her. I'm one step closer to suicide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hocam, for telling us about a relatively unknown side of Eartha Kitt, who stayed in Turkey as well. She should be a very interesting subject for study for us. Now, the floor is open for discussion.
I have a question for you, Arta. I'm sure you saw this coming. As you said, Eartha Kitt had a special connection with Turkey. Not just the song that we heard, but she also traveled extensively back and forth. And in many ways, she reminds me of James Baldwin and his relationship with Turkey. I was wondering if you could comment about that. Did you find any overlapping similarities, any differences? What are your opinions about this?
In two of her autobiographies, James Baldwin is not mentioned. And in William's biography, James Baldwin is not mentioned either. In the acknowledgement part, she writes something about James Baldwin, but it's not about Turkey. And the things she writes about Turkey are very limited, and to be honest, very kind of Orientalist. And she...
the video said that all.
Yeah, well...
that video was like, you know,
yeah.
the epitome of Orientalism.
She tries to, well, she believes that Turks saw her as an Egyptian queen. There were camels in Istanbul walking all around, you know, the roads and... So there were camels all around the city, and people were trying to be civilized in Istanbul.
So she was delusional about Turkey and her...
She was. She talks about 4 men, you know, their car stops, and 4 men are running to her. And obviously they are trying to help. And she, in the end, she says maybe they were trying to help, but she, you know, writes about it as though they are, you know, they were actually trying to, you know, kill her or attack her, murder her, you know. So there's her writings about Turkey cannot really be trusted.
It sounds like her trauma is reflected even in those incidences.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is that, well, she dates, wherever she goes, she dates with someone. And in Turkey, which is fine, I would do the same thing. I sometimes do. But the thing is that about Turkey, she mentions the admiral. He ran there. First, she says the woman who taught her that song was an admiral's wife, and then she says a couple of pages later, I was dating an admiral's son in Turkey. There's something, you know, not trustable.
She's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I would say that. And the biographer also, I'm very thankful that I read the biographer. I accidentally, you know, it just occurred to me, and I said, let me read something about her from a biographer.
I also think it's partially the fact that she wanted to create her own narrative too. You know,
Yeah.
a narrative that fit, like you said, her worldview. And so she saw herself as the perpetual victim, and so the tale that she told reflected this.
Yeah, and Williams, the biographer, says, you know, the same thing in a similar manner. He says, she, rather than, you know, telling the truth, she wants to tell a good story. And in that sense, I understand that biographer is right. Her recollections are so dim, so different that the biographer found out that she had 2 aunts and uncles. But Eartha believes that they were her sisters and brothers. So, you know, she's not reliable.
The truth according to Eartha Kitt. The truth according to Eartha Kitt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Could I follow up on that? that's very interesting, but maybe she, thank you, maybe she really wanted to write something, not a totally official autobiography, but something more like creative nonfiction that wouldn't have been called that way in her day, of course. But as you said, she wanted to tell a good story, and she didn't want to document her life minute by minute, maybe.
I would say that, but at the same, well, I wouldn't say that. You know, I would, but I can't. The thing is that there are reports about her, coming from the CIA and FBI, and she just, documents them. And she tells us about Black Panthers, how, the Black Panthers were against her, and she tells us about, many details about her personal life. But I don't think she was doing something like creative writing. I'm not saying that there was nothing creative. She's creative, but she's stuck to what she was trying to say, that she was unwanted, and she knows she was unwanted, and what she did, she remained unwanted. But again, that doesn't make sense, because whenever she's at the top, she still thinks she was unwanted. We can only understand her from the theoretical position of psychiatry and psychology. And that's what I can say about reading and understanding Eartha Kitt's life, as much as
who was her financer? How did she earn money? Was she, well, I mean...
She danced with Catherine Dunham. Catherine Dunham was a great anthropologist and singer and so on. And she toured all around the world dancing. In Mexico, for instance, and she was a singer. She made the best records of her time, and also she got very expensive gifts from the men she dated with. She dated one of the best families, the sons of the best families in the United States, some of whom were Jews, some of whom were white Americans, WASPs, but the things that she openly writes, he gave me so many, pearls and gold and emeralds and this and that didn't really make me fine. I just still wanted love. Right? So she had no financial problem whatsoever, and she was so rich at that point. She was working at a club called Apollo, and whatever she gained from that bar, or whatever you call it, she gave it to Malcolm X's project. She supported Malcolm X throughout her life, but not Black Panthers. Black Panthers hated her, she says, not me.
My question will be to Mr. Arkan. Do you think Eartha Kitt would still be unique if her family hadn't left her and she hadn't had a trauma like that?
I don't know. How can I know? I think she wouldn't have, I don't think she would be as, influential as she was during her time. Because I think her pain motivated her, obviously. That motivated her because she wanted to be independent, she wanted to be rich, she wanted to be influential. She wanted to be somebody. And that was perpetuated by her, horrible childhood. That she wanted to make that travel, in other words.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any more questions, comments? I just wanted to ask about the writer himself. He wrote the novel in English, right? And was he born in Italy, or was he?
No, he was actually born in the States, but of Sicilian parents. So he was brought up both as an Italian or better as a Sicilian and as an American.
So he knew the language and the
He
culture.
knows the language. He visits Italy very frequently. He was in Rome last year, and he speaks fluent Italian with a Sicilian fun, obviously, and is very much attached to our culture. Yes.
Okay, and what do Italian critics make of his novel?
Well, he's not very much known in Italy. This is a big problem. Italian-American writers are somehow ostracized in Italy because they're not considered cultured enough, cultivated enough. So there is a huge debate going on in Italy concerning the future of Italian-American literature, because actually it has been rejected by Italian studies. Which is very sad because, for example, you wouldn't be able to understand Aldizzone's novel if you didn't know Calvino's folk story collection. So they are very much rooted into Italian culture, but yet Italian culture somehow neglects them and rejects them, which is stupid and sad.
Oh, okay. And one last, could I ask one more question? If that's okay. The title includes a garden, and you were saying he's inspired very much by Italian literature itself. And I remember like gardens in Italian literature, like Tinsi Contini. Yes, so I think he's very much conversant with Italian literature. So it's a pity that.
It is a pity, and also the next novel, which is coming out, I think, at the beginning of next year, is set in Rome, and it's a thoroughly Italian novel. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the reaction of the Italian critics to that.
That's right. Yeah. That will be in English, though.
It will be in English, but he's already found a translator to translate it into Italian. So we'll see what's going to happen.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Just have a brief comment about what our friend Ara was saying about the fact that she was not a normal person. To me, I think she was an epitome of a disenchanted community. The African American community, had experienced a kind of conflictual existence, slavery, Jim Crow. So by the 1940s, she as an individual was disenchanted, and obviously her community was also disenchanted. So, in my sense, I think she was as normal as she can be as an African American.
Yes, please.
I also wanted to, I kind of think in similar terms. You told that she was loved by men and she was a sex icon, but all through that she didn't feel love or she felt unsexy. And I don't know if loving a woman in a sexy Catwoman costume and with her hair and makeup done in a music video is the same with loving her as a person. I feel like it's more like objectifying her. And if you look at her as a person, her emotional luggage, her trauma is a part of her as a person, and those are not, in the eyes of society, the sexiest things. So I think that it was normal what she was feeling. It's not a normal reaction.
I wouldn't comment on this, but since it is brought into our attention by a very beautiful young lady like you, I have to say something. Well, Catherine Dunham, her dance teachers said the same thing. She said she criticized Eartha for having excess luggage, and you said the same thing, luggage. Of course, her understanding, her relationships, that they are mostly personal. We can only talk about them as much as she gives us the details. But she is stingy. She doesn't give us, many details about her personal relationships. They just date, they have fun, they just click. She is given lots of gifts. She meets with the parents, and then it's over. She is back to the factory mode. That, I'm neglected, I'm, this and that.
We need to conclude, I think, but one last question to Yüreğin, if possible. Could you say that mother-daughter relationships are the central, let's say, thematic base of new slave narratives written by women? Because you chose all of your examples from women. Would you say that, or are they matrophobia? Is it some kind of a side subject, side issue?
Well, actually, when I was looking at the novels, I didn't read it as a mother-daughter novel. I just was reading it. I read Beloved as a ghost story and Corregidor as a memory story and whatever. But then I realized that there was matrophobia, yes, indeed, and it was running throughout the novel. So I can say yes, a lot of neo-slave narratives have the theme of matrophobia, yes.
As a central issue?
As a central issue, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And now we have our wrap-up session.
Well, I am thinking of African American literature and section, but I want to look at this as well. Could you
We have reached the very end of our conference. I'm sure all of you are exhausted. Before we say our goodbyes, I would like to begin by reminding you that the Journal of American Studies of Turkey will be publishing your articles. If you revise them, if you expand them, please send them to us by the end of December. Okay? Other than that, there are other things we want to talk about, maybe the future conference in 2 years. Among our guests today, there are participants from other universities. Do you think anybody will volunteer to host the next conference at their universities? Any ideas you can give us?
It takes a village.
No? Well, think about it then. What about some themes you would like to explore? Some suggestions maybe we can take into consideration? Nothing? You're not interested? Yes, Cem, Hoca had an idea.
Perceptions of reality.
Perceptions of reality was one. Maybe...
That could be science fiction.
Anything. I don't know, maybe innovation?
Immigration?
Innovation.
Innovation, sorry. Okay. We should make a note of these. All right, what else? Anybody else? we'll discuss these, yes?
Maybe the state of American studies in Turkey and outside the United States,
Maybe.
which is a big topic.
Okay. Anything else?
Didn't ASAT have one of those conferences?
We did. Maybe we could renew that, that's why. Yes.
I would say earliest, like the history, like the earliest resources, the back to basics, the basic primary texts and I don't know, tradition, something like that.
Canon?
Maybe canon maybe, but the earliest forms of stuff.
Yes. Okay.
And in Antalya maybe.
You are going to do that again, Arda Hocam?
If you say so.
Thank you, we'll keep that in mind. But we're still expecting some more offers. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, finally, I don't want to keep you too long. I know you are all tired. But I would like to thank you all. First of all, I'd like to thank all those who have presented papers. We had guests who came all the way from the States. Joel is one. Santiago is back on his way home. He's flying at the moment. Susan, of course, will be presenting at other universities as well. But we also have guests from Algeria. Thanks for coming. And some people have already left, unfortunately. I would also like to thank our participants who have been so good, who have asked questions, the students, of course. And finally, I think, last but not least, our students. Our students who have volunteered to help us have been wonderful throughout.
Well, I won't add anything more, but we also thank you as the Department of American Culture and Literature, on behalf of the Department of American Culture and Literature, and together with Merdan Hoca, now we would like to present certificates to the students who have helped us so dearly. There are 14 of them, so please bear with us, and we would like to give them certificates.
Geliyorum bir dakika.
Burak Dinç'ten. Burak.
Ha, öyle mi yapalım? Okay, sorry. Richard.
Özge Güler.
Melih Cemre. Birer.
Okay. Meryem Bahar Karataş.
Emirhan Art.
İlayda.
Tuğçe Bingöl.
Elif Selen.
O da ötekisi. Ataberk Bozkurt.
Oğuzkan.
İpek Demir.
Okay, one more. Okay, thank you very much, and we hope to see you in our future conferences. As you know, Hacettepe has that every 5 years. So, you know, ASAT every 2 years, but Hacettepe every 5 years. So, hope to see you here.
If we're still around.
Yeah, if we are still around, if we still exist. Thank you.